Geshelli Labs have committed a crime against audiophiles almost all over the world, and it looks like this. For between about $1,300 US and $2,000 US, depending on how you spec it out, more on that bit later, the Dayzee DAC appears to offer a potential endgame DAC for many people, but not for everybody, and that could very well include you. At the heart of the Dayzee's initial appeal is its use of a dual set of AK4499 DAC chips from AKM. For some time now, these have been popping up in various flagship DACs, and they almost always sound fantastic. Yes, the implementation of a DAC chip does matter, but you also can't polish a turd, and building around the AK4499 chip means you're starting with a very high potential ceiling of performance, rather than limiting the maximum potential of a DAC with the choice of a different DAC chip. In short, if you're building a flagship DAC today, in my opinion, unless you're going to be doing something with custom filters, you need to begin with the AK449 as the center DAC chip, as Geshelli Labs have done here. But that's not all they've done, and it makes the pain much, much worse. In addition to the dual AK4499 design, the Dayzee offers not just XLR and RCA outputs, not even an XLR and a pair of RCA outputs like the Yggdrasil does from Schiit Audio. No, the Dayzee goes even further and offers you 2 pairs of XLR outputs and 4 pairs of RCA outputs. If you're an audio nutter like me with lots of different amps, this DAC solves so many problems with its 6 different outputs that can all run concurrently. It means you can have all of your speaker amps, headphone amps, preamps, whatever you might want, all connected at the same time, and just choose what you listen to by switching it on. It means that you no longer have to think about rerouting your analog interconnects to connect up the devices that you want to listen to at that particular moment. But let's take another step now and set this disaster up to be even worse, shall we? The other wonderful feature about the Dayzee is it's been set up to not just use standard 8-pin op amps, such as say the Sparkos SS2690 or the Burson V7 Vivds, but it will also support, without any modification, what might be the best op amp on the planet in the form of the Sparkos Labs Pro op amps, the 2590s. Of course, I'll tell you shortly what the different op amps do for the sound, but let's start by talking about the general sound quality first. In its base form, meaning with the standard Texas Instruments op amps, the Geshelli Labs Dayzee DAC is a great DAC. For $1,300 US, you're getting a DAC that could easily be priced closer to $2,500 US. But in typical Geshelli Labs style, it's not. The $1,300 US price tag is for the acrylic case like I've got here, and I love the look of it. But for those of you that don't want to see the wires and the circuitry, you might choose to opt to spend a bit extra and get the gorgeous wooden cases for these that also come with the metal front and back panel. In its base spec with the Texas Instruments op amps, the Geshelli Labs Dayzee DAC is going to be quite similar to other wonderful DACs like the Gustard A26. I don't have an A26 here to do a direct comparison, so I'm not saying they're identical, but my point in raising something like the A26 is to highlight the differences that make the Dayzee unique rather than a blow-by-blow comparison of the two DACs. I've got plenty of that coming up shortly. The key reasons that you might buy just the base version of the Dayzee instead of, say, an A26 is that you're going to get those 6 different analog outputs. There's also a very handy daisy chaining feature for coaxial and optical inputs, where whatever you feed into coaxial or optical, you can then feed out and onto another DAC. That won't work from USB, it won't convert USB into a coaxial output, but you can use the coax or optical input and then take a coax or optical output and onto a different device if you need one. And by the way, the Dayzee's sonic performance from all of its inputs is basically identical. So that means the performance of the DAC is more about the performance of the upstream device, rather than whether you're using AES, optical, coaxial, or USB inputs. Listening to the Dayzee with the stock op amps reveals a DAC that's got great tonality, but it's also got a fairly flat soundstage. For headphone users, that means that all sounds are kind of wrapped pretty closely around the head. They might even sound like they're in pretty much a straight line at the front of the head. And on speakers, that means that you will get a sense of layering and depth because of the natural physics of having 2 speakers out in front of you. But the absolute maximum sense of depth that you can achieve with the speaker setup will be limited by what this DAC's able to deliver in its stock form. The Dayzee's bass sound is also one that's quite crisp on transients, and I don't say that in either a good or a bad way, it's just an observation of what I was hearing. And ultimately, in its stock form, there's just nothing to complain about with the Dayzee. but there's also not really anything separating it from what I would see as its direct competition. In its stock form, in its acrylic case, at that $1,300 price point, I think the Dayzee is a very, very strong DAC with excellent features and performance, but maybe not remarkable compared to the competition at that price. But that's where we really need to move on to talk about the Dayzee's biggest strength, and that's its op-amp flexibility. That is where things get really, really interesting. You see, as I've already said, the Dayzee won't wipe the floor with other DACs when it's in what I call its stock spec. In its base spec, it's going to be cheaper than other DACs it might compete with, like a Schiit Yggdrasil, an LAiV Harmony, or maybe a Gustard A26. But it's going to sound comparable, it's not wiping the floor with them. Once you start playing with op-amps though, that's where the wiping of floors begins. Before I go too much further here, I need to send a huge thanks to Burson Audio and Sparkos Labs. In both cases, they provided the op-amps for this review, and I should make it clear here that when you're buying the op-amps from Geshelli Labs, they're just providing a middleman function of passing on the op-amps from those other companies. And so whether you buy a Dayzee direct from Geshelli Labs with the Bursons or with the Sparkos or any other op-amp you might choose that Geshelli might choose to stock in the future, they're essentially just buying those op-amps on your behalf, putting them into the DAC and sending them your way. And what that means is that whether you choose to buy them from Geshelli or direct from Sparkos, Burson, Staccato or any of those other brands, that's a choice that you can make to do later, or at the same time, there's not really any difference in price. And so I do want to say a huge thanks to Burson and Sparkos Labs for sending out the op-amps, but also because in the case of the Dayzee, you actually need 8 op-amps. That's no small request to put to a manufacturer like Burson and Sparkos, but both of them came to the party. Thank you very much to them both. Still listening to All Roads Lead to Rome and swapping now from the Texas Instruments op-amps up to the Burson V7 Vivd op-amps. And the immediate difference is a much more open and spacious sound. The upgrade to the Burson Audio V7 Vivds, and by the way it's the single version you need, not the dual, that's going to set you back about $440 US. So it's not a cheap upgrade, but it does make a significant improvement to the sound. With the V7s installed, the music just drifts out in front of you. That's not to say it's vague or nondescript, just that it's effortless. The transients aren't quite as crisp with the Bursons installed, but it's not a lack of resolution I'm describing there. The sound is just more natural and, as I said, more effortless when going to the V7 Vivds. There's also a touch more nuance to the sound with the V7 Vivds, and what I mean by that is that you just hear the subtleties of the inflections of maybe a singer's voice, or maybe it's a hint of a different texture or character to the sound. The V7 Vivds bring those out more than the stock Texas Instruments op-amps. And it just makes everything sound more right. I know that doesn't tell you much to say it's just more right, but there's not a drastic shift in anything. It's all subtle shifts other than space and soundstage. That's a significant shift. But with everything else, it's more of a subtle shift, but there's subtle shifts that all add up to make a significantly improved listening experience. For example, when I was focusing on Jamie Faulkner's guitar work in All Roads Lead to Rome, the Bursons sounded what I would call naturally crisp. From the Texas Instruments, it was almost a bit artificially crisp. And what I mean by that is that I could hear from the Bursons the clear sense of exactly when he plucked the notes. I could hear that articulation of the initial pluck of the strings, but it wasn't overly crisp or enhanced. The Texas Instruments op-amps maybe were just overdoing it a little bit. And so for me, it would be a very easy decision to go from the Texas Instruments to the Burson V7 Vivds if you're looking to upgrade your Dayzee. But that's assuming it was the only choice, and it's not. So let's now talk about what happens when you go from the V7 Vivds up to the Sparkos 2590s. That's their pro-grade op-amp. Now I'm deliberately bypassing the Sparkos 33601s, which are the lower spec Sparkos op-amps, because to me, the Burson op-amps are better. And I spoke about that in my dedicated review of the V7 Vivds, so check that one out if you want to know more. But the short answer is if you're choosing between the base model Sparkos op-amps, which are excellent, and the Burson V7 Vivds, the V7 Vivds are better. But now let's talk about the V7 Vivds up against the top spec 2590 op-amps from Sparkos. Swapping to these will cost you $480 US on top of the base price of the Dayzee. And my first thought was that the sound might be just a tiny bit less spacious with the Sparkos compared to the V7 Vivds. However, it's hard to be certain about that because swapping out 8 op-amps does take a while, so there's quite a delay between listening to the V7 Vivds and listening to the Sparkos. What's not hard to be certain about though was that the Sparkos delivered a clear improvement in things like resolution and detail retrieval. It's not a leap of improvement, but there was a definite step forward going to the Sparkos. Tonally, everything was still pretty consistent between these two. There were no major tonal shifts, but the Sparkos came across just a tiny bit crisper to me than the V7 Vivds. And so the Sparkos to me are somewhat like a middle ground between the very slightly smoother V7 Vivds and the very slightly crispy Texas Instruments. That's not to suggest that the Bursons are warm or thick, they definitely are not. The Sparkos are just as smooth and refined, but they have a tiny bit more sense of attack and crispness in the transients, and that tends to bring out just a little bit more of the micro details in the sound. And so to summarise, stepping up from the stock op amps to either the V7 Vivds or the Sparkos 2590s is a big step forward on the Dayzee. And in my opinion, the Sparkos are just a little bit better again than the V7 Vivds. Of course, you can also look at the cheaper SS2601 op amps from Sparkos Labs or the V6 versions from Burson Audio, but for the sake of not dragging this video out, I'm not going to go into depth on each of those options. However, if you've got a Dayzee DAC and you've tried any of those other op amps, I'd love to hear in the comments, and I'm sure others would too, how you've experienced the Dayzee with either the V6 op amps or the SS2601s. Or any other op amp for that matter. Let us know what your favourites have been. And the reason I do want to keep things moving here is because I haven't talked yet about how the upgraded Dayzee compares to the competition, and I still need to talk about that crime against audiophiles that Geshelli Labs are committing here. When I received the Dayzee, I was in the middle of reviewing the Schiit Yggdrasil Plus, the LAiV Harmony DAC, and the Linear Tube Audio Aero DAC. All of these are significantly more expensive than the Dayzee, even when it's fully upgraded, and we're talking $600 or $700 more as a minimum, but despite that, I decided to compare them to the Dayzee because I had them all set up already. Each of these DACs has slightly different output voltages, so rest assured that I did volume match before doing any of these comparisons, and for that, I used a Linear Tube Audio MZ3 headphone amp because it remembers the individual volumes for each of the inputs. So I could set up, get the volumes all matched, and then just flick instantly between the different DACs. With the Schiit Yggdrasil Plus More is Better version up against the Dayzee, I found that the Iggy actually fell just a little bit short of the Dayzee in some of the details and texture and resolution it revealed. Not by a big margin, but there was just a tiny edge to the Dayzee, and this was the Dayzee running the 2590 Sparkos Labs, kind of what I consider the best possible version of the Dayzee. And so the Dayzee was pulling out the very finest of details that give a sense of transparency and insight into the music. It was subtle enough that I couldn't stand here and tell you to listen to this particular track and listen for this particular thing, so much as it just being an instinctive feeling that I was hearing more from the Dayzee. The sound was also a little bit more separated from the Dayzee, and I mean individual instruments were more clearly separated within the soundstage, and so there was a greater sense of spaciousness as well. Once again, the shift was subtle, but I think this one was more clearly obvious than it was in regards to things like the fine details. Across a wide range of tracks, the Dayzee just constantly felt more at ease, more effortless than the Schiit Yggdrasil. And I think that comes down to the fact that it is producing that greater sense of spaciousness. So you can kind of immerse yourself in the music a little bit more easily with the fully upgraded Dayzee compared to the Iggy Plus. And so one of the terms I'd actually describe the Dayzee with is that it's quite an effortless sounding DAC, but it's also very resolving and clean. So it's not a mellow DAC in any way, shape or form, unless you install something like the Burson V7 classic op amps. And something else that surprised me about the Dayzee was that it also seemed to deliver a greater sense of depth in the bass. I'm not suggesting that the Iggy was rolled off down low. I'm sure if you measure both of these DACs, they're going to measure flat from 20Hz to 20 kHz. But the bass from the Dayzee, either because of the output stage going through those op amps or something else, seems to deliver just a bit more sense of weight and even extension in the bass. Perhaps it's the way the Dayzee is delivering the timing of transients, because our brain actually uses the timing of higher harmonics to understand better the deeper bass notes. Maybe that's got something to do with it. Whatever the reason, the Dayzee felt like it was just extending a bit deeper and had a tiny bit more authority deep down low. On the other hand though, the Iggy Plus has a very slightly kind of weightier mid-range to its sound. And some might prefer that, but again, it's very, very subtle. I was splitting hairs here to help describe them to you, and so I don't want to create the impression that there's a vast gulf between these. There's definitely not. And in fact, I would say that ultimately, these DACs are very similar in every category. If they were priced the same, I would say that the choice between them should come down to the flip of a coin. But they're not priced the same, and the $700 difference is significant. That's also before you consider the fact that the Dayzee will accept high sample rate audio and DSD, which the Iggy will not. That may or may not matter to you, of course. What also may or may not matter to you is the fact that you've got 6 different outputs from the Dayzee versus 3 different outputs from the Iggy. On the other hand though, the Iggy is a classier looking device. It's also got a modular design that's going to make the Yggdrasil completely future-proof for the foreseeable future. And so I don't think it's a clear-cut win to the Dayzee in all respects, but it is a pretty clear-cut indicator that the Dayzee is phenomenal value for money. When we then move on to compare the Dayzee versus the LAiV Harmony DAC, the first thing to say is that the LAiV is far smaller, it's also far sexier, as much as I like the look of the Dayzee, and the Harmony is also an R2R DAC, which could be enough for some people to make up their minds. However, the Dayzee and the Harmony are actually impressively similar. Impressive in the sense that the Harmony goes up against an excellent Delta Sigma DAC without losing out obviously on things like resolution and detail. And impressive for the Dayzee because it once again goes toe to toe with a much more expensive DAC. That said, the Dayzee is once again slightly more resolving and transparent than the Harmony, which is a bit more like the Schiit Yggdrasil. We're talking about very fine details here and very fine distinctions, but the Dayzee is just a little bit crisper and more resolving on things like percussive sounds, and it leaves the Harmony, by comparison, feeling just a tiny bit muted or rolled off in the treble. Again, the Dayzee brings a slightly greater sense of separation of sounds, but it also spreads things wider, whereas the Harmony has a better sense of soundstage depth and layering to the sound. And I do personally prefer the overall soundstage presentation of the Harmony, even though it's not necessarily separating individual elements within the soundstage quite as well. The Harmony is a slightly smoother listen than the Dayzee, and for some people that's going to be a character that people are drawn to. But for the price of a fully spec'd Dayzee, meaning with the 2590 op amps, it's very hard to overlook what it's doing for that price. And so unless the physical design of the Dayzee isn't to your liking, in other words, if you prefer the smaller, sleeker style of something like the Harmony DAC, or if you specifically want an I2S input, which the Harmony has and the Dayzee doesn't, if you don't need those things specifically, it's very hard to go past that price tag on the Dayzee. And so being very impressed with both of those DACs, I moved on to the last and the most unlikely comparison here, and that's putting the Dayzee fully spec'd up against the Linear Tube Audio Aero DAC, which is a tube-based R2R DAC. The Aero also costs about twice as much as the Dayzee. On a busy track like City of Delusion, I found that both of these DACs struggle to keep up with things and keep things well separated when stuff got busy. But I would say that the Dayzee did ever so slightly better. It was only a slight difference, but it was a noticeable difference. Something else that I noticed was that tonality was very similar between these two. And that's a key point because the Aero's tonality is absolutely fantastic. The Aero's got such a great sense of timbre and tonality that I would consider it almost a benchmark in that regard. And the Dayzee was basically matching it. I say basically because tonality is a bit of a tricky one. I'm using it here to consider the balance of all the different frequencies across the frequency range, but the edges of tonality also blur into the character of the sound. In other words, how the frequencies are then delivered. And that's where the Aero is a little bit different because it's slightly smoother and it's got a slightly richer sense of delivery of the sounds. That's particularly true in the mid-range, and it's not to say that the Aero DAC delivers more mid-range energy, just that it's a little bit smoother and weightier in the mid-range. It's also worth remembering that the tube choice in the Aero DAC will influence this in much the same way that the op amps in the Dayzee DAC will influence that. And so you could easily put the V7 Vivds or V7 Classics into the Dayzee DAC to make it a little bit richer and smoother compared to the 2590 op amps, just as you could swap out the 6.8HC tubes in the Aero DAC to change its sound as well. On a simple track like Gulliku, the guitar was a touch more articulate from the Dayzee, but it was a little bit more resonant from the Aero. Likewise, vocals were richer and smoother from the Aero, but a little bit more textured from the Dayzee. Ultimately, which of these you might prefer would be a question of preference and system synergy. For example, with the Susvara Unveiled headphones, I preferred the sound from the Linear Tube Aero DAC. But with the Headphone 2, I was preferring the Dayzee. And then that is what's aligning with my personal preferences, so your personal tastes may vary further still. And so the point here is that both are excellent, and it's going to come down to what you value and what you want in a DAC. Now, in case you're wondering, the Dayzee is the mystery DAC that I referred to in my review of the LTA Aero, and the Dayzee to me is easily the most impressive DAC that I've heard in the last few years. And so at this point, you're probably wondering what on earth it is that Geshelli Labs has done that's so wrong for me to consider it a crime. Well, let me put it this way. Did you ever meet somebody that you were instantly attracted to, but they were always out of reach? If you ever have, you'd know that sinking, empty feeling in your heart. That hole that nothing will ever be able to fill. Well, that's the Dayzee for most audiophiles outside of the USA and Canada. Due to the size and weight of the Dayzee DAC, shipping costs and the implications of those shipping costs on things like warranty returns mean that currently Geshelli Labs are not shipping the Dayzee DAC intercontinentally. In other words, if you're in Europe, Asia, Australasia, Africa, or South America, you're a little bit screwed. Now, before you get angry at me for holding this information back until the end of the review, I did that for a reason. And that's because I think everybody deserves to know how insanely good the Dayzee DAC is, especially at its price. You'll need to spend at least twice as much money on a competing DAC to get the Dayzee's level of performance. And even then, the differences are often going to come down to a point of preference, not a clear win for the other DAC. Given that the Dayzee will eventually end up on the second-hand market as people pursue DACs in higher price tiers, or if they decide they want something smaller and sleeker, there will be opportunities for you to pick up the Dayzee outside of the US and Canada. And so I thought that you all deserve to know that it is absolutely worth grabbing one of these if you ever get the chance. There's also still a hope that Geshelli will identify a way to actually supply and provide warranty to this device beyond the US and Canada. That might be through local dealership networks, whatever they might find. I know they're working on it. And so don't give up hope yet. That emptiness you're currently feeling inside may yet be filled. And so for now, as always, I've got some links down below where you can click through to Geshelli Labs if you're lucky enough to be in the US or Canada and you want one of these, or if you want to click through to Geshelli Labs and pine over what may yet be one day for you if you're outside the US and Canada. If though you can't wait for that day to come and you're seeking another wonderful DAC, I've linked up here my review of the LAiV Harmony DAC. Now I couldn't decide whether to link you to the LAiV Harmony or the Schiit Yggdrasil Plus here, and so it did come down to a coin toss. If you'd rather see the reviews of one of the other DACs that I've talked about here because all three are wonderful, then just search Passion for Sound Yggdrasil Plus or Passion for Sound Aero DAC and those will come up for you too. For now though, I want to send a huge thanks to channel members, to channel Patreon members, and to those of you that leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.